I'm glad you have a beautiful face. And I'm glad that you have a beautiful life. And I'm just happy to be at the table.
Wait, before you click away, I promise I'm not here to hate on or blindly praise the White Lotus Season 3. Seriously, stick around. In this video, we will take a balanced view. We'll talk about both the good and the bad of Season 3. Originally, I wanted to make a video just about the finale, but I realized it's basically impossible to discuss that finale without covering the entire season. And honestly, you can't really talk about this new season without referencing Season 1 and Season 2 either. So here's the plan. First, we'll look at why Seasons 1 and 2 were so successful, and then we'll explore why Season 3 is, well, different. Not better, not worse, just different. After that, we'll dive into what those differences are. And finally, chat about the finale and whether each character actually grew by the end. So let's start with Seasons 1 and 2. Both of those felt really distant from anything most of us will ever experience. They had their satirical points and a few relatable moments, but they weren't so in your face that we'd see obvious parallels to people in our own lives. As a result, it was easier for us, the audience, to not empathize with those characters and see them as basically symbols of society's problems. The reason it was so digestible for the masses was because they were kept pretty separate from us. But is that really how things work in real life? Now for Season 3, I think it took a different turn by looking through the lens of Buddhism. In Buddhism, seeing ourselves as separate from others is often called ignorance, which is one of the 3 poisons of everyday life. If we adopt that viewpoint, you, me, and the person sitting next to you are all interconnected in this physical realm. That means your actions and mine aren't completely separate. They're all part of the same cycle. In earlier seasons of The White Lotus, there was a major focus on class, status, and wealth differences. Season 3 doesn't lean as heavily into those themes. Instead, it seems like Mike White, the creator, was wrestling with deeper questions. What is identity? What is religion or spirituality? Can we change our nature and still be okay if we lose everything? Do we hold on to our morality and values when we're tempted? Or do we just accept the temptation as something we deserve? This season gives us a pretty painful reminder of the poisons of everyday life, the burdens we carry, and the choices that can affect us and the people we love for a long time. There's this monk at the start of the finale who points out that sometimes our inner struggles have no resolution. Maybe we'd be more at peace if we learned how not to be so focused on solving problems, but instead found stillness within them. Because, if you think about it, a lot of our problems are just our interpretations of reality. They're not necessarily built into reality itself. So in the end, it's our perception that causes the anxiety and struggles we go through. And if we look at the entire series through the lens of Buddhism and its 3 poisons, greed, ignorance, and hatred, well, a lot of what happens in Season 3 suddenly starts to make sense. However, that being said, these are some of the good things I wanted to highlight about the series. The overall message was actually pretty different, and perhaps much needed in our current atmosphere, but it does feel like it didn't come across as effectively on screen. Now, I'm not saying creators shouldn't leave things open to interpretation or imagination, because if you finish a book, series, or movie, and people are still talking about it years later, that's a huge success. However, if it leaves the audience confused, it can become very polarizing, just like our Season 3. So let's discuss why it feels so confusing, or why we feel dissatisfied with the finale and the whole season. And as usual, let's go character by character. Let's start with Gary and Belinda, as we always do. Belinda, who is a spa manager at the Maui White Lotus, ends up in Thailand and happens to see Greg, or Gary, the same man who visited Maui and wooed Tanya, a billionaire. Belinda knows Tanya is dead and believes Greg is responsible, so she's obviously a bit frightened with that information. Greg offers Belinda money to keep his presence in Thailand a secret, and at first Belinda kind of refuses. But then Belinda's son, Zion, comes to Thailand for the last couple of days, and he's the one who convinces her to take the money. His logic is that if they don't accept, they'll be in danger. Since Greg has killed before, he might kill again. Belinda is initially reluctant, but she goes back to Greg, and Zion asks for $5 million, which is way more than the $100,000 initially offered. That $5 million opens up another side to Belinda we haven't really seen before. Sure, she was ambitious and wanted her own business, but that never seemed like a problem. In the finale, though, we see her walking a very fine line. She takes the money, Zion made a convincing argument, to keep Greg's apparent involvement in Tanya's death a secret. Meanwhile, Porn Chai, who was supposedly someone she had a close relationship with, offered to go into business with her, and he's apparently really good, as established early in the season. But Belinda decides to leave Thailand before Gary can change his mind or before she ends up in danger. The way she turns Porn Chai down feels eerily similar to how Tanya once turned Belinda down back in Maui. One way to interpret this is that Belinda's character changes after she and Zion negotiate the $5 million. It shows how even moral, everyday people can be swayed by money. But here's another perspective. Is it really the same thing? Belinda took what seemed like a better deal than her current situation in exchange for silence on something nobody has concrete evidence for. And Greg, given his wealth, might well avoid jail anyway. In practical terms, Belinda arguably deserved that money from Tanya all along, and now she's finally getting it. She isn't some ultra-rich person scamming others. She's worked really hard for a long time, and it's almost like she's been handed this one chance. Sort of punching up, not punching down, making this different from what Tanya did to Belinda. That's where morality starts getting blurry. We can all say, I'd never take that money, but if your financial situation is tough, you might. In return, Greg gets to live a calm and peaceful life. We do see that shift in Belinda as soon as the subject of money comes up. Just like the monk said, quick fixes often bring more suffering and anxiety. You can see the difference in how Belinda woke up on her first day at the resort versus the last. Once she became a millionaire, her peace and her sleep seemed to vanish. She'll probably carry that anxiety forever, so in that sense, the money was just a quick fix, something she and Zion couldn't turn down. Will it come back to bite her someday? Maybe in season 4. We'll just have to wait and see. Then we come to the Ratliff family. We see that a lot of things have changed here. Saxon has actually taken Chelsea's advice and started reading some spirituality books. Do you remember early on in the season when Chelsea called him soulless? It's almost like there was a shift in Saxon after that full moon party. Quick side note, in many Eastern religions, a full moon can signify rebirth. I might have mentioned that in a previous video, but that moment acted as a catalyst for both Saxon and Jaclyn in the Ratliff family. We see Saxon isn't talking in that creepy way anymore. He cares about what Chelsea's saying, and he genuinely tries to finish the book. Sure, he still has his materialistic side, but there's definitely been some change. And about that infamous boat scene, wow. Some of you guys nailed it in your predictions. I read almost all your comments, and one of you wrote that Jaclyn seemed like a people pleaser. Spot on! He admitted that he's a pleaser, and in a family of narcissists, he didn't know where he could draw the line. A lack of boundaries is part of being in a family like that. Like when Victoria described how her brother pinned her down and tried to spit in her eye, but then sucked it back in. Gross. Saxon, meanwhile, just wanted to avoid the conversation. Anyway, by then, Jaclyn had already made up his mind to live in the monastery or pursue something more spiritual. Among the entire family, he was the only one who said he could live without money. Even Piper didn't go that far. Now, speaking of Piper, oh my god, I wonder if she's going to become Victoria 2.0. It was actually a bit funny when she started crying, to be honest, but at least she admitted the truth. She came to Jaclyn's room to say how the situation wasn't her preference. She's used to air-conditioned rooms, clean sheets, beds without stains, and organic veggies. I've wanted to mention this in a previous video, but Piper's stylist probably chose those simple, bougie designer clothes on purpose. Most women know what I'm talking about. The simpler and more beautiful the dress, the pricier it is. Throw in cruelty-free, vegan, all that stuff. But actually, living in a monastery is a whole different ballgame, and Victoria was so right about her daughter. She likely knew Piper was misguided in thinking she could do that for a whole year. Piper admitting that she's pampered and can't live without material comforts is funny, but also points to how the Western world has commercialized Buddhism or any spirituality in a way that caters to the rich, ignoring the core concepts. I think Mike White wanted Piper to basically be the poster child for people who think they can intellectually grasp living without comforts. But then, 2 seconds later, they're off buying designer clothes and their matcha lattes and heading to yoga in their Lululemons. It becomes more of an image than an actual discipline or lifestyle. Let's move on to Timothy. He's had quite a bit of growth from start to finish, even if it's not super obvious. I know it might feel like he's been stuck in the same loop. Every episode he's freaking out about the crisis hitting the family. In the beginning, he'd rather have died than face jail time or losing all his money. But then he had a shift in his thinking after meeting the monk at the monastery. There's something calming about believing we're all part of one ocean, and as the monk described, we're just drops of water separated from the ocean for a moment, our life, before returning to it when we die. It's a pretty comforting way to see things. Timothy asked each of his family members if they thought they could live without money, and everyone except Jaclyn said no. You can interpret that as attachment, another Buddhist concept. Timothy himself was clearly attached to material comforts, and that's why he decided to slip poison to his family, except Jaclyn, who supposedly passed the test by saying he could live without money. But Timothy has a sudden change of heart after everyone has already taken it. For him, personally, his focus shifted. He was no longer attached to his material stuff, but rather to his family. At that moment, he realized that poisoning them was a quick fix he wanted nothing to do with. Of course, the rest of the family was clueless about what was happening. So when Jaclyn made that protein shake without washing the blender, he drank the poison and died, and then came back. That moment should have been super powerful. Jaclyn finally finding his ground, but it just didn't have the impact you'd expect. Maybe the direction wasn't strong enough, or we were given too much to digest in too short a time. The scene didn't give me goosebumps. It left me and a lot of viewers wanting more. More about Jaclyn's growth, more about why he said he saw God, how he reached that spiritual freedom, stuff like that. What I got from it is that Jaclyn under the water represents him living his actual life. He was always struggling, never seeing the light, and then suddenly he does. The monks above him represent his purpose. So I don't think he literally saw God, more that he found what religion spirituality means to him. Freedom. The 4 monks that appeared above him might also mean something. As far as I can understand, it might mean death because the number 4 represents death in some cultures. But there's also a popular story in Buddhism about 4 monks who decided to meditate silently with a candle in front of them. And when the candle flickered and died, each of them broke their silence to show how they were better. And the others should have kept quiet. It talks about finding your truth without asserting it in situations, as in doing something good without others noticing means you haven't done any good at all. But in fact, that's not the case. The reward is for the effort. Maybe Jaclyn trying to prove himself by being a man, and making his drink is what led to him almost dying, showing that trying to live by showing others is what his problem is. He should be more true to himself to attain peace. As for Timothy, remember when he asked God to tell him what to do? Jaclyn's near-dead body was basically the sign he needed. It showed him what he was truly attached to, what he was willing to give up, and what he wasn't. That all the material things are temporary. But what he really needs is his family. And the speech on the boat kind of cements that. He's ready to guide his family through the crisis, now that he's detached from the money, the wealth, the house, and the job. His earlier struggle was about finding that identity, that anchor in life. All of that is great in theory. But like I said, some of the scenes fell flat. For instance, no one got sick from the piña coladas with the poisonous seeds. That's a real mood killer. And Jaclyn not washing the blender? How on earth did it smell okay after sitting out all night? It's tough to believe unless you just chalk it up to necessary plot devices. Overall, I still think Mike White's story was powerful, just that some of these moments could have been handled better. Now we come to Rick and Chelsea. I have to say, I was rooting for Rick from the beginning. He showed real change and restraint, but then at the last moment, he lost it. Also, I think Mike White was trying to show Chelsea and Rick as this fated love story, like Romeo and Juliet. They even mentioned they were yin and yang, but for me, it didn't quite work. First of all, Chelsea kept saying she was there to fix Rick and bring him happiness. I'm not sure that's a healthy dynamic. I get why she might think that, but maybe looking after yourself and not babying a grown man can also be a form of love. In fact, that might be better because it could lead to a more emotionally fulfilling relationship. Meanwhile, initially, Rick didn't seem interested in Chelsea at all at first. He was pretty irritated by her. It felt like a classic manic pixie dream girl setup. Even in the finale, Chelsea's story was entirely about Rick. Beyond her being a yoga instructor and into astrology, we never really learned anything about her. I thought we'd moved past that trope, but apparently not. Again, I understand what Mike White was trying to do. I am just not sure it had a full effect on me. Just when Rick finally seemed to have let go and seemed happy, of course things had to change. But was he really finally happy? If he was, he wouldn't be obsessed with Jim again, would he? Then in the finale, we learn that Rick's mother lied about Jim Hollinger killing Rick's father. It turns out Jim is indeed Rick's father, which wasn't a big shock. But Rick had already shot him because Jim insulted his mother by calling her a slut. A shootout follows between Rick and some bodyguards, and Rick, who's very comfortable with a gun, manages to kill them, but Chelsea is hit in the process. She dies in his arms, and since they promise to be together forever, Rick carries her body back to the resort. On the way, he's shot by Gaitok on Shritala's orders. Honestly, this all happened so quickly that Rick and Chelsea's deaths didn't really register for me. It was sort of predictable. When characters get too happy, you know something tragic is about to happen. The shootout and Chelsea getting shot felt a bit cheesy. Maybe they were trying to show that Rick is kind of like his father. The dark sides are there, and he lets them win at the last moment. And I also think Mike White's point was to highlight hatred and aggression as yet another one of the poisons. If Rick had chosen nonviolence or walked away, none of this would have happened. His monkey brain was obsessed with revenge, and the idea that someone stole what he deserved. He couldn't let that go, and ultimately, he lost everything he cared about. It's a cycle, and we see how destructive it can be. Now we get to Jaclyn, Laurie, and Kate. Right off the bat, I expected things to get chaotic. At least that was my prediction from the earlier episodes. But it never really did. I also didn't expect Jaclyn to turn over a new leaf just like that, with no external influence. They could have given us a better explanation for why she changed or why she decided to apologize. In my last video, I mentioned that maybe all Laurie really wants is a bit of acknowledgement, which Jaclyn had refused before, but finally offered on the morning of their last day. It felt a little rushed, almost like reading Shritala's book suddenly gave her an epiphany. We don't really know the reason, though. If you have any ideas, comment below and let's discuss. Now, Laurie herself seems to have changed as well. During the last dinner at the resort, she admitted that maybe there's a part of her that feels jealous or not enough compared to her two best friends. Then she said something pretty important. Although she tried different religions and different things in life, at some point her choices became clearer because of where she is in life. She doesn't need a specific religion or faith because time is what tells her what's important. I interpret that to mean that as you get older, time sorts out what and who matters most. You might believe a bunch of things are crucial when you're young, but like Kate said, you eventually weed out the less important stuff and nurture what really matters. That's what Laurie is doing here. She's letting go of the other things that might be temporary, like certain kinds of work or relationships, and focusing on what's truly meaningful. And for her, that's right in front of her. She's just happy to be part of it. This was a really emotional moment, and the acting was so good. In fact, out of the entire finale, this felt like the highlight. They managed to move away from their ignorance, like Buddhism teaches, and accept their flaws, choosing each other over aggression. These three friends get a happy ending, and maybe a new beginning in their relationship together. You can literally see how far they've come since we first met them. Their bond has strengthened, and they're genuinely happy with each other now. Now, let's talk about Gaitok and Mook. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what happened there. Gaitok seemed pretty clear that he didn't want to hurt anyone. Even earlier on the day of the shootout, he was thinking about quitting his job because he wasn't happy being a guard. He also knew Valentin and his friends were thieves, but didn't do anything about it, showing empathy by letting them go. Mook, on the other hand, only seemed interested in Gaitok if he was ambitious. It felt like a very conditional kind of love. You could literally see her expression change depending on what Gaitok was talking about. It's almost as if she was living her own dream life by pushing him into certain roles or jobs. I didn't like Gaitok's sudden change at all. He was so sure of what he wanted, and then when Shritala told him to shoot Rick, even though Rick was carrying a wounded, maybe dead Chelsea, Gaitok just did it. Why? Shouldn't he have at least checked on Chelsea? It felt odd that a guy who seemed to follow Buddha's teachings and practice nonviolence would flip so quickly. I've never seen someone's stance change so fast. I thought Gaitok wanted to be genuinely happy, and that happiness would give him confidence, but it looks like he wants Mook more than anything, and he can only be happy if he has her. That's what gives him confidence. Once he got promoted to Shritala's bodyguard, landed the girl, and secured the job, he appeared more self-assured. So maybe in the face of trouble, Gaitok let the darker side of his personality take over. At least that's what I think. Did I miss something? Let me know in the comments. Now, of course, I wondered why no one talked about Chelsea and Rick in the boat or mentioned them in any scene when they were coming back. It's like no one cared. Chloe is having fun. Saxon is busy on his phone. It's just, I don't know, confusing. Even Laurie, Jaclyn, and Kate were right there when the shooting started. Are you telling me none of that affected anyone enough to talk about it? This was literally just a few hours before everyone left on the boat, and Lachlan almost died and came back. Yet we didn't see any family discussion about that either. These are the kinds of things that I think create confusion for the audience. No matter how much someone says, use your imagination, sometimes the characters' moods just aren't consistent with what's happened. If they were somber or sad or even worried, we'd understand. But we see everyone acting pretty normal, almost celebratory, while leaving. That definitely doesn't feel right after those events. And we never got to confirm who Zion saw floating in the lake, though I guess it was Rick, like we predicted. Overall, it feels like Mike White's message this season was very powerful, but the way it was communicated wasn't super clear, so it didn't have the impact it could have. Honestly, I'm more disappointed in the directing than the writing. But then again, our high expectations are because the White Lotus seasons 1 and 2 set the bar so high, it's natural to want more. Anyway, we'll wait for season 4, and we'll watch it for sure whenever it airs. Hopefully, Mike White sees what went wrong this season and makes season 4 that much more impactful. That's it for this video. I've read all your comments, and thank you so much for all the love. This was my analysis of the White Lotus season 3. I'm planning an analysis of Black Mirror. It's coming out this Thursday, and I hope you guys will enjoy that. If not, just let me know, and I'll improve based on your feedback. I'll be releasing my predictions for Black Mirror Season 7 in a day, or maybe even today, so stay tuned for that. Ciao!